The card felt heavier than it should have. I'd spent an hour the night before making it, folding the thick cream paper just right, writing out a small prayer for the year ahead in silver ink. My 28th birthday. Not a milestone, I guess, but it mattered to me. I clutched it in my lap, sitting in the corner of my grandparents' living room, surrounded by polished wood and the kind of silence that weighs on your chest. The room was full of people. My parents, my siblings, aunts and uncles, everyone talking about quarterly projections and who would oversee the new property acquisition. My father's voice carried across the space, confident and commanding as always. My mother sat beside him, smiling that tight, practiced smile she wore when she wanted to look like everything was fine. No one had said a word about my birthday. Well, almost no one. Happy birthday, sweetheart. My grandmother's voice was soft, almost apologetic. She reached over and squeezed my hand, her fingers warm and papery against mine. I tried to smile back. Thank you, Grandma. My mother glanced over at us just for a second and then looked away. My father didn't even turn his head. The conversation rolled on, a tidal wave of business talk and family obligations that had nothing to do with me. I felt my throat tighten, that familiar burn behind my eyes that meant tears were close. I pressed my thumb into the corner of the handmade card, feeling the edge dig into my skin. Maybe if I focused on that small pain, I wouldn't feel the bigger one. I wondered, sitting there in that elegant room with all these people who shared my blood, if they'd even noticed I was there. If any of the years I'd spent trying to be what they needed, reliable, quiet, helpful, had ever registered. Or if I was just furniture to them. A chair they sat in without thinking about. 3 years ago, back when I first felt the weight of all this settling on my shoulders, I thought maybe I could fix it. I'd been sitting in my apartment early one morning, the kind of morning where the world feels cold and hollow, even though the sun is shining. I'd pulled out an old photo album, one of those cheap plastic ones with the sticky pages that yellow at the edges. There were maybe 20 photos total, covering the years from age 8 to 16. 8 years of my life compressed into a handful of snapshots that told a story I hadn't wanted to see. There was a picture of me at 9 years old, holding my baby brother. I remembered that day. My parents had been at the office again, and I'd changed his diaper, made him a bottle, walked him around the living room until he stopped crying. I was 9. In the picture, I'm smiling, but my eyes look tired. Too tired for a kid. I flipped through more pages. Me at 11, helping my sister with her homework while my parents argued in the next room about a contract that fell through. Me at 13, cooking dinner for everyone because no one else was home. Me at 15, sitting in the conference room of our family business, taking notes during a meeting because my father said I needed to learn the ropes. 4 school portraits across those years, and in every single one, I looked exhausted. I'd grown up fast, too fast, and somewhere along the way, I'd started believing that if I just kept helping, kept being useful, kept holding things together, they'd finally see me, really see me. But that morning, staring at those photos with a cold cup of coffee in my hand, I realized something that made my chest ache. They'd gotten so used to me being the adult that they'd forgotten I was supposed to be their daughter. My faith back then felt like a distant echo. I went to church because that's what we did. I prayed because I was supposed to. But God felt far away, and family love felt conditional, like I had to earn it by doing more, being more, sacrificing more. The guilt was constant, a low hum in the back of my mind. What if I wasn't doing enough? What if I failed them? What if their approval was the only thing keeping me from being completely alone? But back at my birthday gathering, sitting in that cold, polished room, the weight of it all felt crushing. I needed to say something. I needed my mother to at least acknowledge that today mattered, even if no one else would. I waited until most people had drifted toward the dining room for appetizers. My mother stood near the window checking her phone. I walked over, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Mom?" She looked up, her expression blank, polite, like I was a stranger asking for directions. It's my birthday today, I said quietly. I thought maybe we could talk, just for a minute. Her face changed, not softened, tightened. Her jaw clenched, and that smile, that awful practiced smile, spread across her lips. Emily, this isn't the time. We have guests. I know, but we'll talk later. She turned away, slipping her phone into her purse and walking toward the dining room without looking back. I stood there, frozen. The rejection was sharp, a knife sliding between my ribs. It wasn't even the words. It was the way she'd looked at me, or rather, the way she hadn't, like I wasn't worth the effort of an honest conversation, like acknowledging me might crack the perfect facade she'd spent years building. The room felt colder after that. I crossed my arms, trying to hold myself together, and wondered if reconciliation was even possible, if healing was something my family was capable of, or if this silence, this careful avoidance, was just how it would always be. That evening at the family business meeting, things got worse. By that point, my entire family had watched me sit through my birthday without a word. I'd felt my mother turn away when I tried to reach her, and I was starting to wonder if I even mattered to any of them. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. We were all seated around the long conference table in the office building my grandparents had bought decades ago, the same table where I'd sat through at least 40 meetings in the past year alone. The walls were lined with awards and framed photos of groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings. My father sat at the head of the table, my mother to his right. I was halfway down, next to an uncle who barely acknowledged I existed. The meeting droned on. Financial reports, expansion plans, arguments about who would manage what. I'd been quiet for most of it, like always, but something in me snapped. Maybe it was the birthday no one remembered. Maybe it was the look my mother had given me. Maybe it was just the accumulation of years of being invisible. I think we need to talk about boundaries, I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. My father glanced at me, eyebrows raised. Boundaries? Personal time. Respect for people's lives outside the business. We all work hard, but there's no balance. People are burning out. Silence. Then my uncle laughed, a short, dismissive sound. Emily, this is a family business. We all sacrifice. I know that, I said, my hands clenched under the table. But sacrifice shouldn't mean we lose ourselves. We should be able to have lives, families, time to breathe, without feeling guilty. This is not the time for this conversation, my father said, his voice flat and final. My mother said nothing. She just stared at the papers in front of her, her face carefully neutral. Passive, silent. I felt small, smaller than I'd ever felt. My voice didn't matter here. My needs didn't matter. I was just supposed to keep my head down, keep working, keep pretending everything was fine. The weight of their expectations pressed down on my chest until I could barely breathe. Later that evening, seeking refuge after the birthday no one remembered and the meeting where no one listened, I found my grandmother still in the living room. She was sitting in her favorite chair, the lamp beside her casting a warm glow. She looked up when I came in and patted the seat next to her. "Rough day?" she asked gently. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She reached over and took my hand. "Tell me what's on your heart, sweetheart." And I did. I told her about the birthday no one remembered, about my mother's dismissal, about the meeting where my voice was swallowed up by indifference. I told her how exhausted I was, how I didn't know if I could keep doing this, how I wondered if God even saw me, or if he was as distant and indifferent as everyone else. My grandmother listened, her eyes soft and sad. When I finished, she squeezed my hand. "I've been praying for you, Emily," she said quietly, "for years. And I've been praying for this family. I know it's hard. I know it feels impossible. But I believe God sees you, even when they don't." She opened the Bible on the side table, the pages worn and marked with notes. "There's a psalm I come back to when things feel dark," she said. Psalm 27. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm 27,001. She read more, her voice steady and sure. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Psalm 27,000 dance. She looked up at me. That's a promise, Emily. Even if your family doesn't see you, God does. And His love isn't conditional. It's not something you have to earn. I felt something shift in my chest, just slightly. A flicker of hope, fragile and small, but real. My grandmother prayed with me then, her hand still holding mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely alone. Maybe God was closer than I thought. Maybe there was a way through this that didn't involve me carrying everything on my own. But that night, alone in my apartment, the hope felt harder to hold on to. I sat at my kitchen table with my journal open in front of me, a pen in my hand, tears streaming down my face. I tried to write, tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Just questions. Endless, exhausting questions. Why wasn't I enough for them? What had I done to deserve this kind of neglect? Was I unlovable? Unworthy? I'd spent my whole life trying to be what they needed, and it still wasn't enough. Nothing I did ever seemed to matter. I wanted to pray. I wanted to believe that God cared, that He was listening, that He had some plan in all of this. But when I closed my eyes and tried to reach out, it felt like shouting into a void. Silence. Just silence. The weight of abandonment pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I felt worthless, invisible, like I could disappear and no one would even notice. The loneliness was so deep, it felt physical, an ache in my bones that wouldn't let go. I wrote in my journal, my handwriting messy and desperate. God, are you there? Do you see me? Because I don't think anyone else does. I don't know how to keep doing this. I don't know how to keep pretending I'm okay when everything inside me is breaking. But there was no answer. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. I closed the journal, laid my head on the table, and let myself cry until there were no tears left. And somewhere in the back of my mind a question lingered, sharp and painful. Was this all my life would ever be? Trying and failing to earn love that should have been freely given? Or was there something more, something deeper, that I hadn't yet found? I didn't know. But I was starting to wonder if faith could carry me through this loneliness, if God could meet me in this pain, even if my family never did, and if forgiveness, whatever that even meant in a situation like this, was possible at all. The questions stayed with me as I turned off the lights and went to bed, the weight of the day settling over me like a heavy blanket. My 28th birthday, a day I'd hoped would be different, a day that ended just like so many others, alone, unseen, and wondering if things would ever change. The morning after my birthday, the silence still ringing in my ears, I woke up and reached for my phone out of habit. I scrolled through the family group texts, 17 messages about quarterly reports and an upcoming property inspection. Not one mention of my birthday. I opened social media, checking to see if maybe someone had posted something I'd missed. Nothing. 23 family members on that thread, and not one of them had remembered. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Now here's where bitterness starts to take root. I could feel it like something dark and heavy settling into my chest. Part of me wanted to be gracious, to tell myself it didn't matter, that birthdays were just arbitrary dates anyway. But the other part, the part that had spent 28 years trying to earn their love, was furious. I tried to pray. I really did. I closed my eyes and forced the words out. God, thank you for another year. Thank you for my family, even though they forgot. Help me not to be angry. But even as I said it, I knew it was hollow. I wasn't praying. I was bargaining. If I pray hard enough, if I'm good enough, maybe you'll fix this. Maybe you'll make them care. It felt less like faith and more like desperation, like I was trying to control the outcome by performing the right spiritual moves. The truth was, I was considering something I'd never seriously thought about before. What if I just stopped? Stopped showing up to family gatherings, stopped trying to be heard in business meetings, stopped pretending everything was fine? What if I just walked away from all of it? But even as the thought crossed my mind, fear followed close behind. If I cut them off, would I lose the tiny thread of connection I still had? Would I be completely alone? And deeper than that, a question I didn't want to face. Why did God let me be forgotten again? 2 weeks later, I finally confronted Mom. I'd been rehearsing what to say for days, running through conversations in my head while I drove to work, while I made dinner, while I tried to fall asleep at night. I needed her to understand. I needed her to see what this was doing to me. I drove to my childhood home on a Thursday afternoon. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. Pristine lawn, expensive cars in the driveway, everything perfectly maintained on the outside. I let myself in through the side door into the kitchen, where I knew she'd be. She was standing at the counter, sorting through mail. She looked up when I came in, surprise flashing across her face. "Emily, I wasn't expecting you." "I know, we need to talk, Mom." She set down the envelopes, her expression already guarded. "About what?" "About everything." I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "About how you forgot my birthday. About how you've been ignoring me for years. About how every time I tried to talk to you, you just shut down." Her jaw tightened. "Emily, I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to say something real. I want you to acknowledge that this hurts, that I matter." "Of course you matter. Then why don't you act like it?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "Why can't you even have a conversation with me? Why do you always turn away?" She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her eyes, pain maybe, or fear, but then it was gone, replaced by that familiar cool distance. "I think you're being unfair. I've always done my best." "Your best?" I felt tears burning. "Mom, your best doesn't include remembering my birthday. It doesn't include actually listening when I'm hurting. It doesn't include, I can't do this right now." She turned away, picking up the mail again like I wasn't even there. "I have things to take care of." I stood there, frozen, watching her pretend to read an electric bill. The rejection hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to meet me halfway. She was too afraid, too broken, too locked in her own walls to let me in. "Okay," I said quietly. "Okay." I left without another word. A month after my birthday, I raised the boundary issue again at another family business meeting. I'd spent weeks thinking about how to approach it differently, how to make them understand. By that point, I'd already watched my family ignore my birthday, felt my mother turn away when I tried to reach her, and started to wonder if any of this was worth fighting for. But I had to try one more time. The conference room felt colder than usual. My father sat at the head of the table, reviewing financial projections. My mother was to his right, as always, her face carefully neutral. My uncle and a few cousins filled the other seats. "I know we talked about this before," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I really think we need to address work-life balance. People are burning out. Families are suffering. We need clear boundaries around personal time." My uncle snorted. "Here we go again." "Emily," my father said without looking up from his papers, "we've discussed this. The business requires commitment." "I'm not saying we shouldn't be committed. I'm saying we should be able to have lives outside of." "If you can't handle the workload," my uncle interrupted, "maybe you're not cut out for this." My mother said nothing. She just sat there, staring at the table, as if I weren't speaking at all. "That's not what I'm saying." I could feel my face getting hot. "I'm saying we need healthier structures. We need to respect each other as people, not just as workers." My father finally looked up, his expression flat. "Your concerns have been noted. Let's move on." And that was it. Dismissed. Again. Like I was a child interrupting an adult conversation. Like my years of dedication and work meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. I felt the bitterness growing, spreading like a stain. Will they ever take me seriously? Is my hope misplaced? 6 weeks later, I found strength in prayer with my grandmother. I'd been avoiding her calls for a few days, not wanting to burden her with my anger and hurt. But she'd kept trying. And finally, I drove over on a quiet Saturday afternoon. She was in her living room, the Bible open on her lap. She looked up and smiled when I came in, but her eyes were concerned. "Come sit with me, sweetheart." I collapsed into the chair beside her and everything came spilling out. The bitterness, the anger, the temptation to just give up on all of them. The way I kept trying to pray but felt like God wasn't listening. She listened without interrupting, her hand resting gently on mine. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Emily," she said finally, "I want to read you something. Ephesians 4, verses 31 and 32. Get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." Ephesians 4:31, 32. I felt resistance rise up in me. "Grandma, I don't know if I can." "I know it's hard," she said gently. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what they've done. It's about releasing the hold it has on you. It's choosing freedom over bitterness. But they don't even think they've done anything wrong. That's their burden to carry, not yours. She squeezed my hand. You can forgive them and still set boundaries. You can release the bitterness without letting them continue to hurt you. But you have to let God do the healing work. You can't control when or how they change. This is the spiritual turning point in the middle of conflict. Something in her words cracked open a door I'd been keeping locked. Can forgiveness really free me? Am I willing to let go of control? "I don't know how," I whispered. "We pray," she said, "and we trust. That's all we can do." We sat there for a long time praying together. I felt the weight shift slightly, not disappearing, but becoming less suffocating. Maybe there was a path forward that didn't involve either bitter withdrawal or exhausting performance. Maybe there was something deeper. Late one night, 2 months after my birthday, I sat alone in my apartment, overwhelmed by bitterness and so tired I could barely think straight. I'd been up for hours, my mind racing through every rejection, every dismissal, every moment of feeling invisible. I kept thinking about my grandmother's words about forgiveness, but the anger felt too big, too justified. I pulled out my journal and started writing. Pages and pages of hurt and rage and questions. Part of me wanted to cut them all off, block their numbers, never show up to another family event again. I wanted to protect myself from ever feeling this pain again. But as I wrote, something else started to emerge, a small, quiet voice underneath all the noise. What if protecting yourself doesn't mean cutting everyone off? What if there's another way? I closed my eyes and tried to pray, but all I could manage was, "God, I can't do this on my own. I need you. I need your strength because mine is gone." It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't powerful, but it was honest. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe someone was actually listening. My faith felt cracked, but not broken. The pull between withdrawal and courage was still there, but prayer had become a fragile lifeline. Can I forgive when it hurts this much? Is there hope for healing beyond bitterness? A few days later, I was sitting with my husband in our living room. It was late evening, and I'd been unusually quiet all day. He finally set down his book and turned to me. "Talk to me," he said gently. "What's going on?" And so I told him everything. The bitterness I'd been carrying, the temptation to just walk away from my family completely, the confusion about what forgiveness even meant when the people who'd hurt me didn't seem to care or want to change. He listened, really listened, in a way that made me feel seen. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said slowly, "that forgiveness and boundaries aren't opposites. They work together. You can forgive them, release the bitterness, trust God with the outcome, and still set clear limits about how they're allowed to treat you. But isn't that I don't know, unloving, unkind? Is it loving to let someone keep hurting you? He reached over and took my hand. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say, "This isn't okay and I won't accept it anymore." Not out of anger, but out of respect for yourself and for them. His words hit something deep. Support from my husband was shifting my thinking toward boundaries in a way I hadn't considered before. How do I balance grace and courage? Can boundaries be an act of love? I'm scared, I admitted. What if setting boundaries means losing them completely? Then you'll know they were never willing to have a real relationship with you in the first place. And that's heartbreaking, but it's not your failure. It's their choice. 3 months later, I hit a breaking point. It was late at night, and I was alone in my apartment. My husband was traveling for work. I'd just gotten off the phone with my father, who'd called to demand I work through the weekend on a project that wasn't urgent. When I'd tried to say I had other plans, he'd hung up on me. Something inside me snapped. All the years of trying, all the rejection, all the ways I'd bent and broken myself to earn their love, it came crashing down at once. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. The walls felt like they were closing in. I dropped to my knees on the kitchen floor, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face. A panic attack. I'd had them before, but never like this. This was years of pain erupting all at once, overwhelming everything. "God," I sobbed, my hands shaking. "I can't carry this anymore. I can't. It's too heavy. I've tried so hard, and it's never enough, and I'm so tired of feeling worthless." The memories flooded in. Every birthday they forgot, every time my mother turned away, every meeting where they dismissed me, every moment of feeling invisible and small and like I didn't matter. It was too much. I was drowning in it. "Please," I whispered, "please help me. I don't know how to let this go. I don't know how to forgive when it still hurts this much. But I can't keep living like this." And then, through the chaos in my mind, I remembered something. Words I'd heard before but never really understood. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. I was weary. I was burdened, and I had nothing left. "Jesus," I breathed, "I'm here. I'm giving this to you. I don't know what that looks like or how to do it, but I can't hold it anymore." The panic didn't disappear instantly. My hands still shook. My breathing was still ragged. But something shifted. A small space opened up in my chest, like a tiny crack letting light in. Can I surrender this burden? Will God really carry me through the pain? I stayed there on the floor for a long time, crying and praying, and finally, slowly, beginning to breathe again. This was my point of no return. I couldn't go back to trying to control everything, trying to earn their love, trying to fix it all on my own. I had to either cling to bitterness or surrender to God's healing. And for the first time, I chose surrender. That same night, after the panic attack had passed and my breathing had finally steadied, I couldn't sleep. I'd spent 3 months watching my family ignore me, felt my mother turn away over and over, and finally hit a wall where my body gave out before my heart did. I sat on my couch in the dark, exhausted but strangely awake, and reached for my Bible. I didn't have a plan. I just opened it, and my eyes fell on Matthew 11. I'd read it before, probably dozens of times, but tonight the words felt different, like they were meant for this exact moment. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. I read it again, slowly, out loud this time. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Matthew 11:29-30. The direct encounter with Jesus' words shifted something in my heart. I'd been trying so hard, trying to earn their love, trying to pray the right way so God would fix everything, trying to control the outcome, manage the pain, force the healing, and I was so tired. But here was Jesus saying the exact opposite. "Come, rest. My yoke is easy. My burden is light." I don't know how to do that, I whispered into the darkness. I don't know how to stop carrying this. But even as I said it, I felt something loosen in my chest. What if my worth wasn't something I had to earn, not from my family and not from God? What if it was already mine, given freely, because of who Jesus is, not because of what I do? Can I truly trust Jesus to hold my worth? What does it mean to find rest in Him? I sat there for a long time, letting those questions settle, not forcing answers, just resting. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could finally breathe. The next afternoon, I went to see my grandmother. She'd called earlier, saying she had something important to share with me. When I arrived, she was sitting in her usual chair, but there was something different in her expression. Serious. Almost sad. "Sit down, sweetheart," she said gently. I sat, my heart already starting to race. "What's going on?" She pulled out an old envelope from the Bible on her lap. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting faded. "I need to show you something. I've been holding on to this for a long time, and I think it's time you saw it. This is the story's strategic twist that reshapes Emily's heart." Up until this point, I'd been so focused on my own pain, my own rejection, that I hadn't really stopped to wonder what was behind my mother's walls. I just knew they were there, and they kept me out. "This is a letter your mother wrote to me," my grandmother said quietly. "Years ago, when you were just a little girl, she was struggling and she needed someone to talk to." She handed it to me, and I unfolded it carefully. My mother's handwriting, younger and shakier than it was now. The words were hard to read at first, smudged in places like she'd been crying while she wrote. "I don't know how to do this anymore," it began. "I feel like I'm drowning, and I can't tell anyone. He's so controlling, and I'm so tired of fighting. I've learned it's easier to just be quiet, to not push back, to let him make all the decisions and pretend like I agree. But I'm losing myself. I look at Emily, and I see her watching me, and I'm terrified she'll end up just like me, invisible, silenced, afraid." I stopped reading, my hands shaking. "She wrote this?" My grandmother nodded, tears in her eyes. She was so scared, so hurt. And instead of confronting it, she just shut down, built walls to protect herself. But those walls kept everyone out, including you. I read the rest of the letter. My mother talked about feeling worthless, about how she didn't know how to stand up to my father, about how she was terrified of conflict. She wrote about wanting to be different, to be stronger, but not knowing how. "Get rid of all bitterness, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you," my grandmother said softly, quoting Ephesians 4:31-32. "I know she hurt you, Emily, deeply, but she's been hurting too. And understanding that doesn't excuse what she's done, but it might help you see her differently. Could Mom be as broken as I am? How can I forgive from this new understanding? My anger didn't disappear, but it softened, shifted. My mother wasn't just dismissive, she was wounded, trapped in her own fear and pain. And suddenly, I saw her not as the antagonist in my story, but as someone who needed healing just as much as I did. "What do I do with this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You forgive her," my grandmother said gently, "not because she's earned it, not because she's asked for it, but because holding on to bitterness will destroy you from the inside out. You forgive her for your own freedom, and then you set boundaries to protect yourself, because forgiveness doesn't mean letting her keep hurting you." I sat there holding that letter, feeling the weight of years of pain begin to shift into something else. Not gone, but different, lighter. I remembered a sermon I'd heard a few weeks earlier before everything fell apart. The pastor had been talking about Galatians 5, about the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Galatians 5:22-23. He'd said something that stuck with me. These fruits aren't produced by trying harder. They're produced by staying connected to Jesus, letting His life flow through you. And when you're in conflict, especially with family, these fruits are how you know the Spirit is working in you. At the time, I thought it sounded nice, but impossible. How could I possibly show love and kindness to people who kept hurting me? How could I have peace when everything was chaos? But now, after surrendering the burden, after reading that letter, I started to understand. It wasn't about forcing myself to be loving. It was about letting God's love flow through me, even when, especially when, it was hard. How can I live out these fruits in a hurting family? What does courage look like when rooted in love? That evening, I sat down with my husband in our living room. The turning moment from burden to freedom had come, and I needed to say it out loud, to make it real. "I've decided," I said slowly, "I'm going to forgive her. Forgive all of them." He reached over and took my hand. "How are you feeling about that?" "Scared," I admitted, "because I also need to set boundaries, real ones. I can't keep showing up to every family event, can't keep working myself to exhaustion in the business, can't keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. And I know they're not going to like that. I might lose them completely." "You might," he said gently, "or you might not. But either way, you'll know you're living in truth, and you'll be free. Can I live loved without needing their approval? What will I lose or gain by choosing grace?" "I don't need them to understand," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "I don't need them to change. I just need to be okay with who I am, who God says I am, regardless of whether they see it or not." He squeezed my hand. "That's grace, and that's courage." 6 months later, a new rhythm formed. My husband and I started our mornings differently. We'd sit together in the kitchen with our coffee, and we'd pray. Not long, elaborate prayers, just honest conversations with God. Thanking Him for another day, asking for wisdom and strength. Sometimes just sitting in silence, knowing we weren't alone. One morning, I prayed the words from Matthew 11 again. "Jesus, you said to come to you when we're weary and you'd give us rest. I'm still learning what that means. But thank you for teaching me. Thank you for carrying what I can't." It was simple, quiet, but it was real. And in those moments, I felt the peace that had eluded me for so long. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, but because I'd finally stopped trying to fix it all myself. The following year on my birthday, I went to my grandmother's house, just the two of us. She'd made a small homemade cake, and we sat together in her living room, the same room where I'd felt so invisible just a year before. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said, handing me a card. Not the one I'd made for myself last year, but a new one she'd made. "Thank you, Grandma. I'm proud of you," she said quietly. "I know this year hasn't been easy, but you're different, freer." She was right. My family was still distant. My mother still avoided deep conversations. My father still dismissed my concerns, but I was at peace. Not because they'd changed, but because I had. My identity wasn't tied to their approval anymore. It was rooted in something deeper, something they couldn't take away. Later that year, at a family gathering for the business, my uncle approached me. "Emily, we need you to take on the Henderson account. It's going to require weekends for the next 2 months, but—" "I can't," I said calmly. He blinked, surprised. "What do you mean, you can't?" "I mean, I have other commitments, and I can't take on that level of work right now. I'm sure you can find someone else." He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "This is a family business, Emily. We all sacrifice." "I understand that," I said, keeping my voice steady and kind. "But I'm not available for this project. I'm sorry." I walked away before he could argue further. My mother, standing across the room, watched the whole exchange. Her face was unreadable, surprise maybe, or confusion. But she didn't say anything, just looked at me like she was seeing someone she didn't quite recognize. And that was okay. I wasn't doing this for her approval. I was doing it because God had shown me my worth wasn't dependent on how much I sacrificed or how quiet I stayed. The Lord is my light, and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Psalm 27,001. I could protect my heart with grace and courage because I knew who I was. I was His. That was enough. Now, sitting in my apartment in the evening quiet, I think about how far I've come. I'm not perfect. Some days the hurt still creeps in. Some days I wonder if I made the right choice, if setting boundaries was worth the cost. But then I remember that panic attack on my kitchen floor. Remember the weight of trying to carry everything on my own, and I know this is better. This is freedom. I open my journal and write, trying to put into words what I've learned. Where am I holding on to bitterness? Can I accept God's love as enough? These are the questions I've had to ask myself over and over until the answers finally started to take root. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what hurt you. It's about refusing to let that hurt define you. And boundaries aren't walls meant to punish people. They're protection for your heart, an act of love both for yourself and for others. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. For the longest time, I didn't understand what that meant. I thought rest was something that came after you'd earned it, after you'd fixed everything, after you'd finally gotten your life in order. But rest is a gift. It's the starting point, not the finish line. It's Jesus saying, "You don't have to carry this. You were never meant to. Give it to me." And when I finally did, when I stopped trying to earn love and started accepting it, everything changed. Not my circumstances, not my family, but me, my heart, my peace. If you're carrying something heavy right now, if you're trying to earn approval that will never come, if you're exhausted from striving and performing and pretending, I want you to know, you don't have to do this alone. Jesus is inviting you to rest, to surrender, to be loved exactly as you are. It won't be easy. Setting boundaries might cost you relationships. Choosing forgiveness might feel like letting people off the hook. But on the other side of that hard obedience is a freedom you can't even imagine yet. A peace that doesn't depend on anyone else changing. A joy that comes from knowing who you are in Christ, and that's enough. You're loved. Deeply, completely, eternally loved. Not because of what you do or how hard you try, but because of who God is. Let that truth sink in. Let it change you. Let it set you free.